Sarah ran towards the car, leaving Esteban behind after rejecting his marriage proposal. Amid the confusion of the moment, she sought refuge in the old house where she grew up. There she found an old box, the contents of which were about to reveal unexpected surprises about her future. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda's Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. Sarah was sitting on the park bench, her heart racing and her mind in turmoil. She looked at Esteban, kneeling in front of her, a small velvet box open in his hands. The engagement ring sparkled under the afternoon sunlight, but Sarah could only see a bright blur through the tears forming in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Esteban, I didn't expect this. I can't accept. I can't do this," she responded with a trembling voice, standing up abruptly. Without looking back, Sarah ran down the park's stone path, leaving Esteban there, still on his knees, stunned and heartbroken. She got into her car parked nearby and started the engine, her hands shaking as she gripped the steering wheel. Without thinking much, Sarah found herself driving to her mother's house, the place where she had spent her entire childhood and adolescence. As she drove through the tree-lined streets of the residential neighbourhood, Sarah tried to organise her thoughts. She loved Esteban. Of that she had no doubt. They had been together for almost 3 years, and he was everything she had ever dreamed of in a partner. Caring, fun, understanding. So why did the idea of marrying him scare her so much? Sarah parked in front of the 2-storey house with the light blue facade. The front yard was well tended as always, with blooming rose bushes and a stone path leading up to the porch. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself before getting out of the car. Upon ringing the doorbell, Sarah heard her mother's familiar voice shouting from inside, "Just a minute!" Seconds later, Abigail opened the door, her grey hair tied in a loose bun and wearing a floral apron over her clothes. "Sarah, what a nice surprise, dear," Abigail exclaimed with a smile, opening her arms to hug her daughter. "Is everything all right? You look worn out." Sarah returned her mother's warm hug, feeling tears well up in her eyes once again. "Hi, Mum. I needed to talk. Are you busy?" "I am never too busy for my daughter," Abigail responded affectionately. "Come in, I'll make us some tea." Sarah followed her mother into the house, noticing several boxes scattered throughout the living room. "What's going on here?" she asked curiously. Abigail sighed, a melancholic look crossing her face. "Oh, I finally got the courage to organise your father's things for donation. It's been 2 years since he passed away. It's time to move on, isn't it?" Sarah felt a pang in her chest as she remembered her father. The loss was still painful, even after so much time. She watched her mother moving around the kitchen to prepare the tea, noticing how Abigail seemed thinner and more tired. "Need help with the organisation, Mum?" Sarah offered, wanting to stay busy to avoid thinking about what had just happened in the park. "That would be great, dear. We can chat while we sort things out," Abigail replied with a grateful smile. The two of them sat on the living room floor, steaming cups of tea beside them, and started rummaging through the boxes. Sarah found old family albums, her father's favourite books, some tools, and trinkets he had collected. "Look what I found!" Abigail exclaimed, pulling a dusty shoebox from within a larger box. "These are keepsakes from the beginning of my relationship with your father." Sarah approached curiously as her mother opened the box. Inside were yellowed notes, old photos, and even a saved movie ticket. "You know, Mum, I don't think I've ever heard the full story of how you and Dad met," she remarked. Abigail's eyes sparkled with the memory. "It was my first day working at my father's used car dealership. You remember what kind of cars your granddad sold, don't you?" Sarah laughed, fondly remembering her grandfather. "Of course he gave me my first car. The engine blew out in the first week." Abigail shook her head, laughing as well. "Well, your grandfather wasn't exactly known for the quality of his cars. Anyway, your father came into the shop looking for a car. Your grandfather thought he looked like someone who didn't know anything about the subject and would be a good first customer for me." Sarah listened attentively, picturing her parents young in that situation. Abigail continued, a nostalgic smile on her lips. And indeed, I sold a car to him. But I think it wasn't exactly because he liked the car. 2 days later, he came back claiming that the car had some problem. While your grandfather was assessing the vehicle, your father and I kept talking. He was so charming, Sarah. In the weeks that followed, he returned several more times, always claiming problems with the car, but nothing was ever found. Abigail laughed, rolling her eyes. Then I told him that if he wanted to ask me out, he needed to do it properly and not make up excuses to come see me. And that was the beginning of our story. Abigail wiped away a tear that ran down her face, looking fondly at an old photo of her with her husband. "I miss your father so much," she whispered. Sarah hugged her mother, feeling her own heart tighten. It was then that she decided to share what had just happened. "Mum, Estevan proposed to me today." Abigail stepped back, her eyes wide with surprise. "But that's wonderful, dear. You two make such a lovely couple. Why aren't you celebrating?" Sarah lowered her gaze, ashamed. I turned down the proposal. Actually, I ran away." "Oh, Sarah!" Abigail held her daughter's hands. "But why? Don't you love Estevan?" "I love you, Mum." "Very much," Sarah replied, feeling the tears welling up again. "But I was scared. Mum, I grew up watching you and Dad have a loving and happy marriage, and I also saw how much you suffer from his absence. I don't want to get so attached to someone, share a whole life, and then lose them." Abigail remained silent for a few moments, reflecting on her daughter's words. Then, with a sigh, she spoke. "Sarah, we cannot predict what the future holds. And if that day I met your father at the car dealership someone had told me I would lose him, I would still choose to live it all over again. To live the love story I had with him. To have you and your siblings. And to have all these beautiful memories." Sarah listened attentively, her mother's words touching her deeply. Abigail continued, "Missing someone is the price we pay for having lived unforgettable moments. If you love Estevan, don't deprive yourself of living in the present out of fear of the future." The two stayed embraced for a long time, Sarah absorbing her mother's advice and reflecting on her own actions. She thought about Estevan, about all the happy moments they had shared over the years, and about the love she felt for him. Suddenly, Sarah stood up, determination in her eyes. "Thank you, Mum. I need to go." Abigail smiled, understanding without needing any explanations. "Go, dear, and don't forget to call me later." Sarah hurried out, got into her car, and drove back to the park where she had left Estevan. Her heart was racing, but this time it wasn't out of fear, it was out of anticipation. Upon arriving at the park, Sarah frantically searched for Estevan. She found him sitting on a bench, looking desolately at the velvet box in his hands. She approached slowly, heart in her throat. "Estevan?" she called softly. He looked up, surprise and a spark of hope in his eyes. "Sarah? You came back!" Sarah stood in front of him, reversing the roles from earlier. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I got scared and ran away. I was a fool." Estevan gazed at her intensely, waiting for her to continue. Sarah took a deep breath and said, "I love you, Estevan. And if your proposal still stands, my answer is yes." Estevan's face lit up with the brightest smile Sarah had ever seen. He pulled her into his arms, hugging her tightly. "Of course it still matters, my love. I love you so much." There, in the same park where hours earlier Sarah had run away scared, the couple sealed their commitment with a passionate kiss. The ring finally found its place on Sarah's finger, shining like a promise of a future together. As they walked hand in hand through the park, making plans and daydreaming, Sarah thought about the conversation with her mother. She realised that true love was worth any risk, that the precious moments she would live by Estevan's side would outweigh any possible future pain. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Sarah looked at Esteban, her now fiancé, and felt a wave of gratitude and happiness. She was ready to build her own love story, inspired by the example of her parents but unique in its own way. That night, lying in her bed, Sarah picked up the phone to call her mother and share the news. While waiting for Abigail to answer, she reflected on how her life had changed in a matter of hours. From a young woman frightened by commitment, she now felt confident and excited about the future that awaited her alongside Esteban. "Hello, Mum," Sarah said as soon as Abigail answered. "I have some news to tell you." And so, with a light heart full of love, Sarah began to plan the next chapter of her life, knowing that no matter what the future held, she would have precious memories to cherish forever. If you enjoyed, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 5 to let us know how much you liked the story. Also, watch the video that is currently on your screen. See you soon.